like to call the meeting to order. No. No. Everybody will sign in, and that will show who was here. Review of minutes, I'm going to table that till next time because we really didn't get any minutes, so that's okay.
So just to clarify, so Richard did the meeting minutes for the
Yes.
elementary school portion.
Yes.
Is somebody going to do them for the high school, and do we want to combine them, or do two separate?
No, let's leave the high school out for now,
Right, okay,
because we don't want you to have to do that. We'll figure that out.
okay, so I do have the ones for the elementary schools. I'll
Okay, we'll
distribute
do
those
that.
for
We'll
the
take
next-
care of it next time. The next is vice chair. Can I open it up for nominations for vice chair?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we nominate John Ports for vice chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further nominations for vice chair? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. John, would you like to say a few words?
Inspire us.
Turn your microphone on.
Meant that way. No, but thanks for the vote of support. I appreciate it. Happy to work with the chair on kind of helping the building committee move forward. And we have obviously a big task in front of us with the elementary schools and then the high school. And so it's a great opportunity for the community, and I'm happy to serve in whatever capacity I can to help move that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We're moving to the next item on the agenda, which is the elementary schools conceptual design update. And everybody here received yesterday an email with what we're going over this evening. One of the things I want to point out is we're not talking tonight about cost of anything, because Scott and Shane's teams are looking at reviewing the cost estimates at this point, and that's something that we'll be bringing forward at the next meeting. So we're just talking about designs at this point, and I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Tonight, we've got a lot of information to cover, so I was just saying to Chairman Sideris that certainly as we move along, you're welcome to ask questions so that we don't lose track of them, and we'll try to follow up on them. We have essentially come to a place where we have an option for each of the sites, which we feel incorporates the feedback and the best features of all the various prior options that we've discussed. And then we've got a variety of different strategies incorporated into those to comply with the educational goals and the budgeting goals, et cetera. So we're going to talk through all that tonight. First, we're going to talk a little bit about, in the last meeting, the committee talked about and identified and discussed some of the project goals. And tonight, we're going to put those into 4 categories, not that they don't necessarily overlap a lot. Don't want to imply that. They certainly do. But 4 categories for the purpose of presenting the information tonight. And we're going to summarize and keep in mind, we're in the conceptual design mode. We haven't even gotten into schematic design. But we do think it's important at this point in time to reassure the committee in a lot of areas, particularly with regard to the primary goals in these 4 categories of kind of what we're doing and what we're going to be doing in the future to make sure we meet those goals. So we're going to start off by going through that. And this master planning and budgeting goals, certainly you could suggest that that is the highest priority in terms of the goals, because without the right project plan and without meeting the budget, there is no project. So we want to first talk about some of the strategies that we've employed over the last several weeks to make certain that we are doing a good job collectively thinking about a master plan of all the projects, but also being very conscious of the budgeting goals. So we've talked to the committee about the reuse of the existing buildings and systems, where where Watertown has already made significant investments in the buildings. And
Scott,
so,
1 second, if you
Yes.
don't mind. There's a sheet of paper going around everybody. Sorry to interrupt. This is name and address and phone number for the MSBA. So that's what that is. Sorry, Scott.
no problem, no problem. And so, as a solution to that goal, and we talked about this a little bit last time, we have developed a much more detailed renovation scope for each of the buildings. We're not treating the entire building, for example, as all being in the exact same condition, because there have been projects completed, there's been work done at all of the facilities, and so it wouldn't be economical to just assume we're going to go in and gut out everything in every building where we're doing renovation. We've tried to be very specific and break down the level of renovation that we would propose in the existing buildings, where we're proposing to leave the existing buildings into level 1, level 2, and level 3 renovations. So we'll be talking about that a little bit further. And I would add that you have a couple of 8.5 by 11 handouts. I'm sorry, you have one 8.5 by 11 handout, and it starts with the project goals and solutions. This is identical to what we're presenting in slide form now, but the slide form is an abbreviated version, so we've also handed out the sort of longhand version, which has a little bit more description in it in terms of the goals and the solutions. And then certainly, one of our goals was to integrate the complete construction schedule for all the school projects. Thus far, we have talked about and considered the projects somewhat individually and in a vacuum, because when we consider them as just conceptual projects, we don't yet know exactly what the project on each site will be, and therefore it's difficult to start to insert, for example, all 3 of the elementary school projects into an integrated construction schedule. But we've now been able to do that as we've kind of honed in on specific options. Minimize the duration and impact of phasing the renovations. Again, when we were thinking about each of the projects kind of individually, we just assumed that each one had to be self-sustained and sort of have its own phasing plan, not necessarily integrate with the others, et cetera. But when we can start to think about integrating them, we can minimize the duration of the overall impact, and we're going to show that in a master planning and construction schedule tonight. Specifically, we're going to show how the Hosmer School, if it could be utilized as a swing space for all 3 of the projects, that we can significantly reduce the phasing impact at the Cuniff and the Lowell. Now, what does that mean? Once we reduce, and any reduction in phasing impact is less impact on faculty, students, and staff on that site. It's an expedited construction period, and it's certainly less expensive to do. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we achieve that tonight. Create a rolling start to construction. We haven't talked about this a lot in the past, but we certainly know that it would be a significant impact. We've always talked about overlapping and integrating the 3 elementary school projects as having a lot of advantages. But we did not want to imply, if we ever did imply, that all of a sudden, one day, same day, construction crews would mobilize on every single one of these sites and go full force into construction, because that would be complex, it would be impactful, and it would be very complicated, and it presents a number of challenges. So it's always been our goal to overlap and integrate the 3 projects, but to, after we kind of sorted out what the concept for each site might be, to start to think about how a rolling start could occur. And a rolling start to us means you start one project on one site, and then you look at how you overlay the other 2 projects as you move through the construction duration. And we're going to talk about that in the proposed construction timeline and schedule. And then utilize the town-owned available swing space to minimize the need for any kind of temporary or modular space. I know this has certainly come up the building committee has brought it up, but if we can minimize the amount of modular space that we are deploying on the site, that's all sunk costs. So it's all money that's coming out of the building project. So when we think about the construction of all three of the projects, if we can come up with a way to avoid any kind of temporary or modular space, we certainly want to do that and instead put that money into the permanent buildings. And then create a construction schedule that allows for, if the committee ultimately decides to do it, allows for a single general contractor or construction manager to be able to execute all three of the projects. And we're not necessarily saying that there's any kind of commitment to that at this point in time, but in the past, we've talked about a number of advantages associated with that: efficiency advantages, cost advantages, kind of streamlined communication advantages, order of magnitude advantages, keeping a consistency in the kind of mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems that go into each of the schools. So we've talked about some of those advantages, so we need to think about how we structure a construction schedule and strategy that at least allows that to happen. And then we want to be conscious of the fact that we took a look at the Lowell School previously, specifically to make sure that there would not be any relationship between the Lowell campus and your ultimate planning of the high school that would interfere with that, and that was resolved. We also think it's a good idea to keep in mind that even beyond the elementary schools, you may want to consider the fact that you want to keep options open for swing space for the high school. So we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight as well. Meaning keep the Hosmer in play as a potential swing space, not only for the elementary schools, but for the high school. So all of that having been said, this is a conceptual, if you will, construction schedule and also construction strategy for integrating the three projects. And I want to speak to what we're proposing here, but I'm going to need to stand by the screen. So if nobody is offended by it, I'm going to carry this tabletop mic over to the screen and utilize that creatively. This schedule proposes that if you started a new Hosmer Elementary School first, for example, and that project is going to have a total duration of construction and site of, you can see construction 18 months and site 4 months. One of the things, and we're going to talk a little bit later about specifically what that option looks like in terms of a building plan and a site plan, but here we're just talking about the advantages in terms of construction sequencing and an early rollout or a starting rollout of the Hosmer. One of the things that we would propose is that if you started that new construction, let's say, for example, in November of 2019, you would not have to start the other two projects initially. You could sort of get comfortable with a contractor being on a school site, get started into the process, and have the town kind of collectively get used to the idea of being in construction on projects. And then you could sequence the new additions, because we're proposing that the Lowell Elementary School receive new additions and renovation. So you could sequence the new additions, the new portion of the Lowell School, to start approximately August of 2020, so that you've had kind of a break-in period of getting used to the idea. If this is the same contractor doing all three of these, you've also gotten to know them. They deploy site super, appropriate staff on the Lowell Elementary School site, and they begin the new additions there. Now, they're not huge, the new additions are not, so that's a much shorter duration. We're suggesting about 9 months of construction. Well, at the time that new construction on the Lowell site would be finishing, and I'm talking about just the new construction there, the Hosmer Elementary School, new elementary school would be completed. And so those students at the Lowell Elementary School could move into over the summer period, over the summer period, could move into the Hosmer Elementary School because the Hosmer Elementary School students are moving into the new Hosmer, and that space could become available. That becomes incredibly valuable for the Lowell Elementary School because if you can take all of the students off of that campus and allow the contractor to take over that entire campus, existing building and the new construction they've already developed for 9 months, you significantly reduce the overall construction period, and you have no impact to student, staff, et cetera, other than the fact that they're going to school in another location. But that's a fairly limited duration. Keep in mind, it overlaps the summer. So it's essentially what we would consider a semester of school where they would be going and utilizing the Hosmer as a swing space. You could also take the Cuniff, and when the new construction is complete at the Lowell, you could start the new construction at the Cuniff, leaving the students on the site, but just doing the new construction there so that they didn't disturb the existing operations of the school. And then you could sequence the renovation of the Cuniff so that those students could also move to the Hosmer as a swing space because the Lowell students would be going back into their completed building at the Lowell site, and then quickly and efficiently do the renovation and the remainder of the new construction at the Cuniff site. So if that kind of conceptual schedule was put together, there are a lot of efficiencies in the overall limiting the construction timeline, because what this does is it reduces the proposed timeline we had for all of the construction durations on the projects. It takes away all of the additional phasing costs we had associated with the 3 projects previously, and it takes away all the temporary modular space that had been inserted cost-wise into the 3 projects previously. So significant savings associated with coordinating and correlating the construction of those 3 schools. And then we do point out that one of the things that, we're not involved with the high school, but certainly we're aware that this building committee is considering the future in the high school project. And in terms of making sure that we don't limit any high school options, we would point out that once that existing Hosmer is no longer needed as a swing space to conduct these elementary school projects, keep in mind that the town owns a building on that site that has a gymnasium, an auditorium, a full cafeteria, and a lot of classrooms and a lot of extra swing space that could be the swing space with a limited amount of additional modular space for the entire high school project to completely free up the high school campus, which is certainly going to be a big challenge if it is ultimately decided that the new high school building goes there. So we think it would be very wise for the building committee to at least leave that option on the table for the high school project, because it does one other thing. We also think that the building committee should consider the possibility of decoupling the preschool pre-K project from the elementary schools and instead attaching it to the high school, because there was certainly some early conversation about the value of integrating a preschool program with the early childhood development program at a high school level. We've done it before. Town of Natick did it. Town of East Bridgewater did it. We've had numerous examples where at least a portion of the preschool pre-K was integrated in high school. If you did that, not saying that you would, but if you just kept that option open and you decided to do that, also keep in mind that the MSBA will pay for a number of those classrooms, those preschool pre-K classrooms that are associated with the high school, as long as they're part of an integrated program at the high school. Wouldn't pay for all of them, don't want to imply that, but certainly Natick, East Bridgewater, et cetera, we have high school projects where the MSBA participated in paying for a number of those classrooms. So just something to consider as we're thinking about multiple years out for the projects. That's a lot of information. Maybe I should just take a pause and take any questions.
Just a question, and I'm trying to remember when we did this in Reading. Does MSBA pay for the cost of transporting this? Do they pay for the portables as part of the phasing of the project? Do they pay for the transportation to transport kids from the Lowell to the Hosmer or to the Count to the Hosmer?
They no longer pay for temporary space. So they wouldn't pay for any temporary space, and then they wouldn't pay for the transportation, right? Any other questions? Okay. We just want to review some of the primary goals because we knew that tonight would be on television and the television audience would be broadcast, and that audience maybe has not had a chance to hear about some of the goals. So part of this is just reiterating all of the work that's been done by community members, faculty, staff, administration, this building committee, all those who have participated in the process. But we also want to highlight some of the things that are being done as part of this project to meet those goals. So for example, resolve overcrowding. And keep in mind that that doesn't mean classroom overcrowding. That really means the overcrowding and lack of a lot of support spaces and specialized education spaces. And I don't mean special education, although there are some of those spaces in need, but it's more providing 21st century kinds of educational spaces in the 3 elementary schools. And just as an example, this project collectively, the 3 elementary schools as proposed, includes a net addition of over 50,000 square feet of educational space, even though we're not anticipating a significant increase in student population. This additional space is about getting 21st century specialized educational space, tutorial spaces, small support spaces, independent study spaces, classroom support spaces, more community space, more music, more art, more media, those kinds of spaces into the building. Creating flexible learning environments and creating additional space for student projects, learning activity. In the collective programs at the 3 elementary schools, we have over 10,000 square feet of what we would refer to as learning support / learning common spaces, and it's not just a giant area. This space is broken up into a lot of individual support spaces in the building, and some of which will continue to be programmed and refined as we move into schematic design. But we've certainly got the space available to address those goals that came out during the visioning sessions. And in line with that, small learning tutorial spaces, independent learning spaces, quiet learning spaces. Just as an example, within the 3 elementary schools, we have a net addition of, it's actually over 20 small group support spaces in the building. So we felt that as we talked about last week, the fact that we were kind of refining the program for all 3 schools and making sure that there wasn't anything in there that wasn't needed, and that we had in fact reduced the program significantly as a cost-saving measure. Our concern was that without talking about this, these goals and the solutions, there would be this feeling that something had been lost. So a lot of what we're doing here is just to reassure the building committee of all the things that continue to be part of this program and continue to be built into the newly proposed elementary schools. Teacher collaboration space, we've got over 2,100 square feet collectively across the 3 elementary schools, divided up into a lot of spaces. We talked a lot about increased climate control in all the academic areas, and tonight, as part of our cost summary in our level 1, 2, and 3 renovations, we're going to be talking about leaving some of the existing building systems in place that are fairly new. We just want to reassure you that we're not shortchanging our goal of bringing air conditioning into academic classrooms and all those kind of things. That's still part of this program. And then maximizing indoor-outdoor connections. We have done a lot in all of the proposed concepts to create those outdoor academic learning environments, not just outdoor play spaces, but outdoor learning environments. That's still part of the plans, part of the programs, and part of the conceptual solutions that we're reviewing tonight. Addressing space for after-school programs, again, those kinds of spaces are still in the program and are included as part of the conceptual options we'll be reviewing. Better student dining spaces, both in terms of more space, improved acoustics, keeping, perhaps even zoning the dining areas. All of the proposed projects, all 3 elementary schools either include brand-new dining areas or comprehensively expanded and renovated dining areas, so we're not shortchanging any of that. Increased meeting space for administration and parents. We've added conference rooms, small office support spaces, all those kinds of things we've kept in the program in keeping with the goals. Meeting the individual needs of students with a variety of different small group and specialized learning support spaces still in the program in all schools. One of the things that rose to the top was creating a welcoming, inviting, and secure entry experience. And so at all 3 of the schools as proposed, whether it's renovation or whether it's brand new construction, we're utilizing a combination of very comprehensive renovation and brand new construction, all 3 schools, to completely change the kind of entry experience and certainly improve the security sequence at all of the sites. And then opportunities for display and exhibition of student work was a big and important goal. And we have got a lot of scope in these proposed conceptual renovations, and certainly in new construction, to modify common areas and provide plenty of opportunities for that. Community facilities, the building committee has had conversation around the importance of this. So the conceptual options that we're going to be talking tonight do in fact provide a full-size gymnasium at the Cuniff. And one of the things we're going to actually be proposing at the Hosmer site is leaving the existing gymnasium in place as a community center, and in addition to that, providing a new full-size gymnasium in the Hosmer, so that ultimately the district has a net add of an additional gymnasium in addition to getting a full-size gymnasium at the Cuniff, which doesn't exist there. So in many regards, you could say 2 new full-size gymnasiums as a net add of community space, and a lot of other resources too. But those are examples of community resources that are are included in the program. And then the overall environment of the school, certainly we still have scope in all these projects for introducing branding, themes, graphics, modifications of lighting, student exhibits, in all of the key areas that would be mostly, often traveled and would be obvious to anybody circulating through the building. So, and then we have reorganized particularly in the Lowell and the Cuniff, where we're proposing renovation and addition, completely reorganize those programs and those floor plans to make sure that we've got much better functional connectivity, particularly in the academic areas, and then better adjacency of programs. So we'll be showing those floor plans as we move along. So just highlighting some of the goals and kind of the solution that's in the conceptual options that we're presenting.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
At the Lowell's going to increase in size by over 150 additional students, right? Is the gym at the Lowell currently a full-size gym?
The gym at the Lowell is what we would refer to as a middle school size court. It's 50 by 74 instead of 50 by 84. So what we're proposing at the Lowell is actually to keep that 50 by 74 court and supplement it with a secondary physical education space in the form of a fitness space,
Okay.
so that they have multiple teaching stations available there.
Okay, great. I was just sort of concerned that we haven't talked about sort of that health and wellness goal, but also sort of keeping the Lowell gym the same size seemed concerning when we're increasing the size of school. Thank you.
Right. They'll have, I mean, in some ways, you could look at it as a bonus, whereas where the Hosmer, the newly proposed Hosmer that we're going to be talking about tonight will have kind of one standalone gymnasium. The Lowell will have a slightly smaller standalone gymnasium, but in addition to that, they'll have a fitness space that we're proposing to add to them. It's a good question. Any other questions regarding those? Mhm.
Who would this community center serve? You're proposing at the hospital?
The community center, and when we say community center, we're going to talk about it in plan a little bit more, but essentially it suggests that if we left the Hosmer building and we removed we'll call it the Z-shaped academic building, so that the only thing that you had remaining on that campus was the 2002 work, which was done not so long ago and is in good condition, and then the gymnasium, auditorium, dining space, that we would take all of that space, convert it to preschool pre-K as kind of a standalone facility. The preschool pre-K wouldn't necessarily need the auditorium and the gymnasium, but it would be unfortunate if we proposed to kind of just demolish those pieces off. So it's really about keeping that investment that the town has made in place and possibly making it available. Like right now, it's probably the busiest gymnasium of the 3 elementary schools. So keeping that space available to the high school that sometimes practice there, or for community use after hours, et cetera. Yeah. How did I get back? Oh, what'd I do wrong? One question and I got all confused. Shameful. In the category of educational and community visioning goals, and again, we don't want to imply that this captured all of them, we just want to comment about some of them. Improved parking and circulation on the sites. And keep in mind that on all of the 3 sites, there's going to be this delicate balance between creating potentially more parking and losing green space. There's no magic solution to that. And also keep in mind that when we talk about adding parking to any of the sites, it's going to be in direct conflict with any kind of sustainability goals that we may be trying to achieve. And it is in direct conflict with the current trends in traffic engineering, where the suggestion within the research is that we should be thinking collectively about the possibility that there'll be less trips, 20 years from now as a result of technology that we may not even be aware of. So this committee, along with the design and owner's project management team, will be having this discussion throughout the duration of the design of these projects in terms of balancing parking with green space on all of these sites. But we still certainly recognize it as a goal. Providing outdoor learning opportunities. We mentioned earlier that we are in fact thinking about that, and we'll be talking about it in more detail when we take a look at the site plans. Including clearly delineated play zones. Again, we're going to be talking about that as we show the development of the site plans and the things we've created there.
Hey, Scott, if I could
Yes,
just real quickly, on those, related to both of those first two, I don't want to lose sight of stormwater management and the opportunity to maybe help with that impervious area and green space. Stormwater management's also, with the second goal, a real good learning opportunity. So
Absolutely.
just
Yep.
keep that on the
Yep.
radar.
We may even have that under the sustainable piece, because some of these could fit in either category. Improving visibility, appearance, branding of exterior, et cetera, et cetera. And that includes really developing a campus-style environment. This is particularly important at the Hosmer. We have such a large parcel that we're kind of master planning for, Watertown's use for decades. And so keeping in mind that the connection of sidewalks, plazas, not just for the school, but also for the surrounding neighborhood is important at all three sites. And we want to touch on sustainability and energy efficiency because we've had a lot of good information come forward, both from the town's committees, the building committee, et cetera, and we don't want to imply that we're ignoring that or that won't be incorporated. So we did want to just comment on what we were doing related to those goals. Certainly related to the Watertown design guidelines that were adopted in 2015. We'll continue to use that as a roadmap for incorporating principles outlined in that document, so we certainly want to recognize that. When it comes to things like utilizing on-site renewable energy generation, I know that the town's Green Committee specifically identified solar. We would want to design all of these roofs, new roofs, and take a look at existing roofs to support photovoltaics because the technology is changing very rapidly. And then during the schematic design process, we certainly want to evaluate whether it's going to be potentially PPA versus a power purchasing agreement where someone else installs the photovoltaic panels or whether the town would purchase them directly, but those will be discussions we'll be having at that point in time because they're budget related. With regard to the lead sort of level that we might want to achieve in the buildings, once we move out of the conceptual design phase, we would presume that as we move into schematic design, we'll be generating a lead scorecard for each of the school projects and talking about what we want the goals to be and how achievable they are. They're going to be very different by project because, for example, at the Lowell Elementary School, you've got a historic building, but there are currently pilot programs for historic buildings to achieve and try to balance out some of the disadvantages they have versus a new building in terms of energy efficiency because it's certainly sustainable not to demolish an old building. So we'll be looking at each one of them independently and their lead scorecard and determining what collectively we feel like are the reasonably achievable goals and what the costs associated with those goals are. So that'll be a time for that. And even with some of the energy efficiency standards that have been identified by the town's Green Committee, we will be taking a look at those in schematic design as well. Even the sort of design for maximum lighting, anything associated with solar orientation, considering things like ground and air source heat pumps, during schematic design, we will certainly be taking a look at that so that if there's a desire to incorporate some of those things after looking at the cost benefit, or if the project budget will allow it, we would want to incorporate it at that point in time. So we will be taking a look at that. Third-party commissioning was one of the things that was identified. Certainly as part of the schematic design process, we'll be talking with the building committee about some of those advantages. Certainly you want commissioning on the buildings. We'll just have to decide what level of commissioning would be appropriate, and we'll be presenting, along with Daedalus, some strategies for that and kind of some options in terms of the intensity of the commissioning and the costs associated with that. And then I'm sorry.
Sorry, that's a result of the lead status too that you were talking about.
It is.
Like enhanced commissioning is required if we
Right.
go for solar requirements.
And I should have mentioned associated with lead too. Certainly, we're not, this committee still hasn't decided if we're going to be designing a building that would meet a lead status, for example, lead silver, and just designed to that criteria, or if we're actually going to pursue the submittal, approval, and official achievement of LEED. We have to make that decision, because there certainly been pointed out there are costs associated with that, not the design, not the design costs, just to get that sheet of paper that says you officially made it. There's a cost associated with that, and the committee will have to decide if you want that, or if you're satisfied that if you meet the goals and criteria set forward, that that's all that's necessary. So we'll be having that discussion.
Can I ask you another question, Scott? At the risk of asking a question, I'm hoping someone else also has, and as an educator, not an architect, I don't know what commissioning is. What do you mean by third party?
No, it's a super good question, because you're not alone. I would say a very small minority of the people in the world, I should have explained, would know what commissioning is. I should have explained it. When the building is in the design process, commissioning generally includes bringing in a third party unrelated to the designer and the owner's project manager, who is an expert in building systems, most of the time mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, also exterior building envelope systems like windows, doors, roofs, et cetera, and analyzing the design to determine that it is efficient, appropriate, that you can manage it, particularly with regard to the MEP systems, that they make sense, they're easily manageable, and they make recommendations with regard to the design. Then the real value, and where they kind of got started in this business, is once the building is complete, they come in and evaluate the systems to ensure that they're operating exactly as they were designed to operate, and then they stay with you for, depending on the level of commissioning, they stay with you for a period of time and continue to assist you in making sure you understand how to operate those systems and that they're operating optimally. So they're referred to as often referred to as a commissioning agent. On an MSBA project like your high school, coincidentally or interestingly enough, the MSBA will hire and pay for the commissioning agent because they perceive that there's a significant value there, both to you and to them, in terms of making sure you get the right systems and that they're operated correctly and that you know how to run them. So. We'll talk about the CUNF, what we believe after a lot of culminations and incorporating all the good things and a variety of different options we presented to the building committee, that we have an option that we really believe in. I think I'm going to ask Julie to talk through the site plan and a series of slides we have related to the CUNF.
So just jumping right into what we're calling our addition renovation option E here for CUNF. As Scott mentioned in that overall phasing timeline, the real jump towards kind of obtaining some of the goals that we were talking about would be to immediately begin this new construction portion, which we're seeing in the building footprint as the white portion of the building. And so we would be able to just immediately build new square footage at the rear of the site, and that would be a two-story portion that wouldn't interfere with the continuing educational programs of the existing school. We can see that the brown portion of the building would be the existing to remain, so that would be with a focus on keeping as much of the existing as we can and renovating with the advantage of then keeping a lot of those existing systems in place with updating and a lot of the money that was put in previously to be able to get some more life out of that. What we're seeing instead would be a small demolition of the 1997 classroom portion to the west of the site, and in return we would actually gain about 2 gym sizes of play space, and that would be situated between the 2 academic wings, which we'll show in plan. As in intent of keeping more green space at the Cuniff site. The parking would stay where it is, and then the back portion of the site would be relieved from the south property line a bit, so that there would still be green space in the rear of the school for the students to access for gym class or recess.
Let me just, a couple of things I would point out with regard to this site plan. Certainly, if we move this proposed concept into schematic design, we'll be evaluating a number of things. For example, do you actually expand the parking a little bit to the rear? Do you consider a drive that goes around the entire perimeter of the building? With this addition, we've actually pulled the building back from the property line significantly more than it would be, for example, if it was all new construction back there. So we do have room to pull a drive around. We felt like, and we still feel like, it would compromise the usable play area, but we are trying to generate both a swath of play zone in the rear of the building and then a significantly large outdoor play area to the west that is encompassed by the building. So we think that we certainly would continue to investigate, those kinds of adjustments to this site, but we think the way the building locates on this site and arranges itself has a lot of advantages. And it even has advantages over any of the new schemes that we presented. They sort of look good in plan, but as the committee pointed out, in order to do an all-new building on this site, it was more expensive, but maybe most importantly, it forced us to push a building into the hill on both corners of this site and really push up tight against the property lines, and then leave very little room around the back of the building. And so we thought the new schemes actually were not as attractive as this kind of renovation addition option on this particular site.
We would also continue to landscape at the front of the school too, so that from the exterior, there would be a change and an impact to the street level, and the main entry would remain where it is.
Lindsay, you had a question?
I just have a question. I have a lot of strong connections to the baseball program in town, and I know that they are sort of acutely struggle with field space already. This eliminates a ball field, albeit small. It's regularly scheduled for young kids playing baseball in town, and so the town sort of in general is really struggling for athletic field space, and so I'm sort of concerned about the loss of that space, and I just don't know where it would be replicated somewhere else. I know it's a small field, but it is regularly used by the town. Steve always has the answers, right?
I do. I wish I did. She's right. We have problems, and we have a need for more space, not less.
A minor point too is, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the physical education curriculum probably does have units associated with t-ball, baseball, also just finding another location for that physical inside.
We could certainly continue to look at that. When we raised the question, we struggled to find a lot of specific, because we saw it wasn't a regulation field, we saw it was a very small field, and we were trying to determine exactly what it was used for, and we struggled to sort of find a definitive use for it. It's small enough that we could likely find a space to fit something similar in.
And then just looking at how this might be phased, it could simply add the new construction portion at the rear of the site without inhibiting the existing building. And then when that's completed, the demolition of that 1997 portion, partially, about 6 classrooms, could be underway, and then roll into a full renovation of the existing to remain portion. At the same time that renovation is underway, site work around that new construction portion can begin, so that there's no delay in sort of getting the entire site ready for the new school year. Jumping into the floor plan,
Second,
If I,
John.
just one quick question. So, in terms of going, this goes back to the phasing that you talked about with using the Hosmer, and that process. So, as an example here, when you do the renovation in Phase 2 for the Cuniff, would you envision the entire school moving to
Yes.
the Hosmer? Or as opposed to some of them going into the new building there?
The entire school would go to the Hosmer.
So you wouldn't, even though you built that new space, you wouldn't use it?
The gym and cafeteria is in the
Oh,
rental
it's a
space,
gym, but
though.
there's some classrooms there. Yeah, but
There are some classrooms there, but the complications associated with having standalone boiler, electrical, plumbing, supplying that building while you're cutting off and trying to renovate the other building is one of the reasons the renovation addition options previously were so expensive. So if we can just take all of the students and administration staff out of that building and allow the contractor to have free reign, it's a much less expensive project for
Yeah,
him to
okay.
execute.
All right, thanks.
in this floor plan, the shaded portion would be the existing to remain, and then we're seeing that the unshaded portion would be new construction, which would include 4 classrooms on the first floor, 5 classrooms on the second floor, a full-size gymnasium, and additional support space. Program-wise, we were really looking at, instead of continuing the disconnect that occurs in the existing school by having the academic wings separate on the second floor, we thought maybe we just sort of celebrate that and sort of create 2 small schools within this one school. So the idea in program being that the lower portion academic wing may serve grades 3 to 5. The new construction portion could serve kindergarten to 2nd grade, and then they would have those shared community spaces at the center of the school that exist along that main corridor. We also placed the new construction portion in axis with that main corridor, just so that there was sort of a seamless transition, and it also separates sort of the more public spaces from the academic spaces by putting dining, music, art, and gym all on that left side of the main corridor, and a lot of the academic spaces on the right. So you can see on the second floor, it almost exists as sort of 2 separate schools, but they would always have that opportunity to meet in the center. By doing the footprint sort of in this way, it also leaves a lot of available roof space that we could use for photovoltaic panels in terms of sustainability. And then in these diagrams, it just sort of breaks down our renovation scope. So the idea being that the green portion, though it would be fully renovated, that would only be a level 2 renovation. The blue portion would be a level 3 renovation, meaning that we're actually doing more substantial changes, some wall reconfiguration in there, and then the purple being new construction. We are also looking at a new construction, small portion addition at the front entry of the school to just reevaluate the security and also provide space for that the administration needs. And on the second floor, we have the opportunity to bump out some of those existing classrooms in order to make them bigger. And also you can see the new construction portion in the back with a lot of that roof space in the center, and then the demolished portion that would leave a lot more of the site available. This renovation scope slide just sort of breaks down per color more of what those changes might involve. We aren't including any level 1 state renovations at the Cuniff, and it would primarily be the 2 and 3 and the new construction.
One of your,
With those, are you looking at the major pieces of equipment, keeping those, replacing them? Is that determined?
we are, I mean, it varies by school and by level, but for example, at the Cuniff. And there's a handout that includes more detail, because we provided more detail to the cost estimators as they're looking at the level 2 and level 3 renovations for the schools. And so there's more detail in there. We won't walk through that, but we wanted the building committee to have that. But for example, at the Cuniff and the Lowell, there are relatively new gas-fired condensing boilers. And so the level 2 and level 3 renovations propose leaving those in place. For example, at the Hosmer, even though it's a relatively new boiler, it's older technology. It's a cast iron sectional boiler, so this document shows that that system gets replaced as part of it. So it varies depending on the age of the system and the particular building.
So there is a report out there that gave a life expectancy of some of those, it was Odin Zello or something we should look at, because we
There
don't have
is.
to replace major equipment in 10 years or 15 years. We need to weigh that up now, whether we do it now or later.
We did incorporate the feedback from all of those reports. And if a system in either one of those reports was on a timeline for renovation or replacement, we included its replacement. But for example, you'll see in some of these level 2 and level 3 renovations, in some instances, we didn't replace exterior windows because those exterior windows received the highest possible grade in both of those reports, which was sort of an as new. And certainly as we roll into schematic design, if we want to continue to tweak and adjust exactly what we're replacing, exactly what the scopes are, we can do that. We just wanted to make certain for this conceptual snapshot, because we are going to be talking about what the budget for these projects as proposed would be next Wednesday, the June 6th building committee meeting. We wanted there to be a clear understanding and even give the building committee members some time between now and then to take a more detailed look at this document and understand when we're talking about the level 2 and level 3 renovations, what is and is not included in those.
Mary?
Just a question, would you, I think I see it, but I just want to confirm. So you would add an elevator in the rear part of the rear academic wing? So there'd be 2 elevators
On which?
on the building? The part that you're adding in the back that has the kindergarten?
Yes, yes, we'd absolutely have to have one there. Yep,
You want it?
you're right. We absolutely would, yep.
John?
So if I look at the, I'm kind of curious about the walls and kind of the degree of renovations there. Maybe it's something you'll get into more detail at the next stage. But if I looked at the Cuniff, doesn't have a page number here, but the page that had, that's the one, yeah, the one that on the first
That one.
floor, that one. So if the difference between the green, which is a level 2, and the blue is level 3. So level 3, for example, the media center, I look at the media center and the dining, that looks to be the kind of configuration of walls and spaces, looks to be, I think, fairly similar to what it is now, or does it? But there's different kinds of lines that you've drawn there, like the walkway between the media center to the left of it, that's different than the walls around the dining. Is that significant, or are we not at that level?
It is significant in that area, the reason it's a level 3 renovation is because we want to introduce a lot of adjustments in walls. We want to introduce a lot of transparency around that dining area and open it up a little bit more. We want to completely demolish that stage to create more space for the dining area. So to us, that level 3 renovation in that entire zone represents a lot of removal, adjustment, new wall construction, and really a very comprehensive renovation. You end up touching every single wall, every single finish, ceiling, lighting, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, et cetera.
But just as an example, the dining space looks like it's completely kind of self-contained, I think pretty much like it is now with doors on the walls. So you wouldn't,
Right.
you wouldn't open it up more than that.
we would in that we're showing a double line there that is not a solid dark line, which means to us that we want to leave the opportunity to create more openings there, more penetrations through those walls, and introduce more glass there. And so that, in that regard, it becomes a level 3 renovation once we start removing that, yeah.
Thanks.
Mary?
Can you just talk a little bit about what went into the decision to keep all the windows other than new construction?
It certainly could be something that we decide after we look at the budget and see where we are, that we want to add that back in. When we looked at both of the reports, they received a 4/5 score. And so it was and they're in good condition. So we think that prior to just saying that we would remove and replace every single window or storefront system, which the very large windows that you see at the stairwells are either referred to as storefront or a curtain wall because they're more structural than just a window. Before we would necessarily just say we're going to replace all of them, we would want to carefully consider that decision because some of them are in very good condition. And keep in mind that if you look at this kind of floor plan, we are already modifying through the additions that Julie mentioned on the front of the building. We're already modifying a significant portion of the front of the building, so any area that we're doing addition there would receive new windows, obviously, and then the area to the west of the media center where we're doing a new addition to kind of close in where we've demolished off the single-story classroom piece, we would be, it would be new windows across that. So at the end of the day, it's just the windows that you would see in the other green areas. And we may want to, the whole point of developing a conceptual budget at this point in time is to see where it lands and then see what the appetite is for potentially adding more scope to that. And that might be an example of one item we just say, you know what, we don't want to chance it. Let's just do it. It's $250,000 or it's $350,000. Let's go ahead and replace all the remaining windows.
Can I just make a comment? I just want to acknowledge the fact that I know you said this, but just to say it again, that you've created these two separate learning spaces. One's K-2, one is 3-5, and you've got your center space that's really community-oriented when it comes down to it. You've got your gym and your cafeteria and your learning commons. So I think that that's in keeping with the idea of trying to have that separation between community space and academic wings. I'm wondering about the entrance. Are you envisioning an entrance from Warren Street or from the parking lot? Just in terms of where are we going to go into the building?
We're envisioning the entrance would stay in the same location, although we are expanding it some out from the existing building, but we're envisioning that the entrance would occur in the same location that it currently does.
We would include an entrance sort of right below the community gymnasium too, so that if there was after-hours use, that was only.
I think that was my question is, as we transition into those after-hour activities, would there be a separate place for, more community-oriented access? Because, walking through the major hallway of the building is probably not preferable.
Any other questions? That's just the side area, right?
Yeah, and then we just have a massing image that would show sort of the remaining green space and the impact of the existing parking on the new construction.
At the Lowell site, one of the things that we had struggled with for some time is all of the solutions that we presented required so much program area that they appeared awkward as additions to the front of the building. But as a result of revisiting that program and reducing it in some areas in combination with getting the final survey on the site, which had a different setback line than the prior documentation we had received, we now believe that it's possible to do 2 smaller additions on each side of the building. You can see at each end of the academic wings, there's a small addition in this site plan. And it feels restrictive not to be able to point to it. So you can see that once we got the definitive boundary over here, there is an area that we can work with in terms of a small addition over here. And we do know that there are some outcroppings here, but our intention would not to be to go down or to excavate in this area. So we think that we could do 2 stories of construction in this small zone tied directly to the academic portion of the building on that side, and then do a smaller addition than we previously talked about on this side of the building, and still keep the very formal presence of the building on Orchard Street, keep the visual sight lines. We're still playing around with what we would do with parking. I know Steve has mentioned a number of times the possibility of testing some parking directly off of George Street. We've played with the idea of a parking lot that would come into the site and some tiered parking. This just happens to show a row of angled parking. We've also got some sketches that show a row of perpendicular parking. That's the kind of thing that we would continue to explore in schematic design, so we're not necessarily getting too bogged down on it now, but this conceptual approach involves small academic addition here, small academic addition there, and then expansion to the existing gymnasium in the form of a fitness room in the back, and then expansion to the existing dining. You can see right up against where the existing dining area is in the small rectangular white section. We certainly also want to develop the front of the building more, because one of the goals is to make better use of outdoor academic learning environments. So we've started to think about how we would create a formalized outdoor academic area and some learning opportunities out there, including the gardening beds and some of those things. So we want this to be a more formal and much more heavily utilized area. We can actually get access right out of this academic zone if we do a good job kind of tying it to the use of this area. So those are some of the things that we would be exploring during schematic design. There was some conversation about possibly moving Lowell Ave, taking over part of the Lowell playground, considering options like that. And we looked at that, and as the committee is well aware, we looked at some more substantial modifications to this site. But we believe that if we focus the money on this site on, sort of renovation of everything, but then developing this nice outdoor academic courtyard so the building has more presence on the front lawn, a nice job with the academic additions, tying them in neatly to the existing building, and expanding those core areas in the back, that everything else with some minor site modifications here can work well, and then we can focus the expenditures on renovations inside the building and really changing the feel of those spaces inside the building.
One thing I think with that particular site plan also is it's also looking at retention of all the existing trees, because I know you've got some pretty old growth there. And along with the outdoor classrooms, it's also got addition of garden spaces and things that would also be activities for the kids and for classes.
As we mentioned, this project, similar to the Cuniff, would involve the contractor mobilizing on the site, getting perhaps the new additions that are in the front of the building underway. Maybe the ones in the rear, but they're smaller and they could be done with the renovation, so we kind of go back and forth on that. But then after approximately 9 months, the students exiting the building and going to the Hosmer for a swing space so that the contractor has full access to the site and the remainder of the building and can wrap up the new construction and also complete the renovation work there. And then overlapping at the tail end of that, the site work associated with it. And in all of these, we should have pointed out, but in all of these, by starting with just the additions and then removing the students before you get to the renovation portion, we don't get into a squeeze regarding contractor staging areas. It's easy enough to stage the contractor on both the Cuniff site and the Lowell site and not have to do any kind of remote staging. When we were proposing and looking at conceptually the idea of new construction, for example, on the Cuniff site, you may recall one of the struggles with that is we really had no area for the contractor to stage and work for those projects. But with this approach at the Cuniff and the Lowell of just mobilizing to do the additions, we have sufficient area to accomplish that. And again, those kinds of things result in a lower construction cost. This is just showing the shaded areas, obviously the existing lower level. The white area that you see at the bottom right-hand corner is the newly proposed addition. Again, shaded area is existing. The white area is the new construction. And then when you move into the color-coded zones, I'm just going back and forth so you can see the difference between the existing and the new addition, existing in gray and new addition there. One of the things that we really like about this approach, and you see it best actually in the main floor plan, is if we do expand these academic areas with a small addition here and a small addition here, it helps us to create in each of these academic zones some central support areas and some small pull-out spaces that break up this zone of academic classrooms here, and then some shared support space, which may not be a large open space like this. It may be subdivided into some smaller spaces, but it helps us start to develop it as an academic learning center with some shared common space or support space in the middle, and it allows us to do the same thing on this side by taking an existing classroom and subdividing it and kind of making that space. It allows us to pull natural lighting into the central core of that academic area and do the same thing in this academic area. So it starts to set that up very nicely. Same thing going on here on the upper floor level in terms of the way the academic zone's set up with some shared common area in the central area that the classrooms are surrounding. And then just like the Cuniff, we have defined for the portions of the building that remain varying levels of renovation. The sort of gold or yellow area is a level 1 renovation in this case. And the reason on this lowest floor level, the reason that's labeled as a level 1 is you see there really are no program areas in there. That's the boiler room, it's storage room. It's a former art room that just gets converted to storage area. So it's not that we don't really want to expend a lot of money in those areas. Because they're not occupied by students or the public. But then you see when you move into the academic area that was constructed in '96, those are level 2 renovations. And then when you get to the main floor of the building, you can see that The gymnasium, which is still in very good condition, we consider a level 1 renovation where, we're talking about new finishes, but we're not going in and gutting out mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. We're, besides replacing some equipment, we're leaving those basic systems in place and doing all cosmetic upgrades in there. And then in an area like the 1996 academic portion with the classrooms in the media center, we're not proposing significant reconfiguration of walls. You can see the media center remains configured essentially as it is today, and the associated classrooms, but we are talking about new finishes and MEP updates and things like I mentioned earlier, like the introduction of air conditioning in those spaces for the classrooms and for any of the major spaces that don't have those systems. And then when you get to the older what I refer to as the older portion of the building, the original portion of the building, you can see all of that is in light blue because now we're into the most significant renovations, the level 3 renovations. Although a lot of things were placed in the existing building during the older portion of the building during the 1996 renovations, a lot of the cosmetics there were kind of lightly touched, and it was more of a focus on plumbing systems, mechanical systems, et cetera. So we would propose that we go to level 3 renovations on those areas. And then the upper floor, very similar in terms of the proposed scope. Level 2 renovations for the 1996 work, and then the highest level of renovation, level 3, for the original building. And there's a summary, just like we reviewed in Cuniff, that highlights some of the key elements, but I would encourage, we could certainly spend some time talking about this at the next building committee meeting when we talk about the cost, but I would encourage everyone to take some time and go through the detailed document that we handed to the cost estimators that kind of describes the level 1, level 2, and level 3 renovations in a lot more detail. And then next meeting, if there are any questions or if you'd like to discuss that further, it'd be a great opportunity to be able to do that. With level 2, I'm sorry, Mary, go ahead.
I'll let you finish.
With level 2, if we were to summarize it, with a level 2 renovation, we're trying to leave as many of the existing walls in place as possible, because once you touch a wall, you're dealing with the electrical in that wall, you're dealing with modifications to the ceiling as a result of that, you're dealing with modifications to the floor often, because believe it or not, the floor doesn't necessarily always line up from one side of the wall to the next. You're dealing with any kind of mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems in that wall, so it can trigger a lot of things. So a lot of the savings in a level 2 renovation is by not moving a lot of the walls, but even in a level 2 renovation, we are talking about new finishes. In many instances, in most instances, completely new lighting, new ceilings, flooring, wall finishes. So it's not as if we're suggesting the building would kind of be as is. Even the level 2 renovations are fairly significant, as you can see with even the summary list there.
John?
Just a general question. When you, like in the Lowell here, when you add on to the either end, do you approach that as adding something that you try to kind of make it look similar to what was there before, similar kind of brick and configuration, or do you try to accent it in some way and make it look different, or how do you generally approach that?
It's a good question, and it depends on the building, the campus, and the conditions. With the Lowell in particular, we would do something that blends, particularly because the additions are small, and it's not as if they're a huge statement piece. If we were adding a media center, for example, you might be able to break with the aesthetic style and do a little bit of a statement addition, but in this case, where we're just adding a few classrooms on each end, it would seem like blending it with the existing building so that it all look like it belongs. And the fact that we don't have to kind of turn with a big addition and come across the front of the building, and we can keep it in that very formal configuration, we think would allow us to expand it, and essentially, you know, it would not be obvious that it was ever expanded.
Thanks. Mary?
Two things I would just offer. I see that the kitchen is in the level 3 renovation zone, but it does say minimal upgrades to the existing kitchen. So, of course, we got the principal right here to our left, but it barely functions for the 400 and, how many kids? 425?
Yeah, about 420.
I think it would be very difficult to accommodate another 100 kids if there wasn't something really looked at there. So I know why you did it. I know they're very expensive. I think this is one building that would really need a serious look at that. And the other thing is, there's been recurring, pretty significant issues
Well,
with
they said it never really worked.
it never really worked. That's helpful.
Probably new.
The gymnasium systems.
The gymnasium, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The heating system,
Okay.
since the renovation has not worked. From what I've been told, I mean, I just know that it definitely, as eyewitness, does not work. It doesn't heat the gym.
I believe in the detail on the Lowell gym, that is new equipment. It just means that the distribution for the air stays the same, but we will certainly make a note of that and make certain that those systems are addressed.
Just one question. How much flexibility is there in terms of where classrooms are located? Because right now, I can see where the thinking is, but we have, you know, kindergarten and grade 1 with grade 5, and we have grade 2 and 3, you know, off into one area where we just saw with the Cunniff, it was nice to have the learning, you know, groups together based on grade level. So I'm just curious as to what might be the thinking behind that, or is there some flexibility as to where they go?
There's definitely some flexibility as to where they go. We would be kind of limited in that we wouldn't be able to shift much more addition to the, you know, to the, if you will, the left side of the building as it's shown. But in terms of the labeling of the classrooms or the designation of the classrooms, and that applies to almost the entire existing building, as well as a new addition. Our goal as we move into schematic design would be to have a much more intensive review with the staff and administration of those facilities, and certainly your administration to determine more specifically how we're going to lay out all of those buildings.
Great, excellent.
Any other questions? And that's obviously just the massing model on the low. And the value of that, again, is to just show how if we can keep those two small additions as the only expansion on the front of the building, then we can keep the primary facade uninterrupted. We can keep the sight lines to the building, the view corridors, if you will, from the adjacent streets up towards the building. And we can create a much more formalized front lawn, at least in the area adjacent to the building, that maybe will be much more usable by the students and staff. So that would be the goal of the site plan.
Mark?
Yes.
Just a general comment. I mean, it's I don't know the history of the Lowell. Some people may know a little bit more, but even the way it's configured there now, I look at it and I kind of go, why would anyone go to the front of the building? There's nothing, there isn't anything that built, unlike the other, like the Cunniff and the rest of them, there are entrances that are used, there are kind of a dynamic around that area, whereas we've kind of purposely moved everything to the back of the building. And yet, the front of it, I think, you're right, is beautiful. I don't know, in its earlier days, was that the main entrance? And people use that all the time, in which case, how did they get up there? Did they walk up the grass, up to the hill?
Our historian will answer that for you.
actually see my house right there on the corner.
I know where your house is, I know.
The front, well, was now the back of the building, used to be the front of the building. So, so this area here.
Right.
where the old front door is.
Right.
That used to be the main entrance, and
Right.
kids used to line up on the lawn and go into that door. And then when they did the addition in '96, the main office is now in the back. Was the back of the building and is now, the front of the building is on Lowell Avenue. I would recommend somebody changes the address from 124,
Yeah, 120,
Or-
174, but there is
One's
no
to-
address for us.
Right, and so what happened is, in '96, we built the new entrance on Lowell Avenue, but the address is still like 75?
175.
75 Orchard Street, so that's something that Steve Magoon could work on to change the address of the
Name
building.
it like
Because the front entrance,
Okay,
the front entrance.
Vinnie, let's not get into the addresses.
Right.
We want to focus on what we're doing here.
But it's only used for recess, kids go out there for recess.
But we don't see that as we find it odd that at one point in time that was flipped, but there's really no returning from that because it was done for accessibility reasons. And the complications associated with trying to bring parking and drives and circulation and accessibility to the front of the building. So for that reason, it does make sense. But one of the things that we think is interesting is by making that flip and taking all of the traffic, entrance, circulation, everything to the opposite side of the building, it does present an opportunity that's not being taken advantage of currently to develop that as much more of an outdoor academic area. And so for that reason, by taking all that traffic and activity to the back, that zone is really a great opportunity we think that we can take advantage of as part of the project, so.
Anyone else?
Okay, I'm gonna ask Jeff to talk about is there a clock in here? Okay, we're doing good. I'm gonna ask Jeff to talk a little bit about the Hosmer proposal, but I would preface his presentation with the fact that at the Hosmer site, we are proposing that the new construction, the new building, the new school, if you will, be only a K-5, and that the preschool, pre-K either stay in the existing building with some modifications to accommodate the additional classrooms that would be required, but within that existing building, again, minus the Z-shaped building, or that the building committee continue to consider the idea that that preschool, pre-K piece might be incorporated into the high school program, and that this would be only a community facility. I think that based on the timeline, you have some time to make that decision, but when we're presenting it tonight, we're going to be presenting the new Hosmer Elementary School, which we think is the best solution for this site as a K-5, completely independent of the preschool, pre-K, early childhood learning, and community piece of the building.
I'm going to go talk at the wall because I wave my hands a lot. So we just wanted to start by talking about the site plan and kind of start with how we decided to put the building, the new construction where we did. A lot of the early conversation, well, of course, because of the existing Z Academic building being there, that needs to stay in place while we're building the new building, so that kind of wrote out that area. Another thought was to place the building along this side, but one of the things that it did was it really cut off a lot of views to the historic original high school. And then you're also dealing with how to recreate drop-off, how to fit all of its parking and manage the parking with the parking that's dedicated to the facility that's there now. So that, plus actually the acute angle even made it a much more difficult challenge. And as we started placing it and moving it around the site, once it was here, it started to create a relationship with the rest of the existing building, and we saw opportunities for perhaps some interior outdoor courtyard spaces that could be used for shared learning, and then also proximity with new facilities like the new gym that we'd be planning and everything else. So this was sort of the location that was placed. Then from there, we started looking at how these two spaces start getting connected and articulated. One way was to start to create a really strong pedestrian path that went from Winthrop over to Concord. What that does is it creates a path that goes by the entrance of the new Hosmer, as well as goes around what would be the entrance of the remaining building. And starts to create almost small parklets and different pieces that can interconnect the large play area of this side with the large play area of this side. It also gave us the opportunity to turn this baseball field so that's facing the proper orientation, so we're not blinding anyone, and replacing tennis courts, basketball courts over on that side. Once that's done, we've got a U11, U12 size soccer field on this side, which is a little smaller than what was existing, but is the proper soccer field size for 5th and 6th graders from the research we've done. And then we've got additional space here. This is showing another U11, U12 size soccer field, but that could possibly be expanded and tweaked, and that's much like the parking of the Lowell. That's something we're still working with and still trying to manipulate and see how big of a field we can get there. We also were able to add a new drop-off zone all along Winthrop, just to help alleviate a lot of the stress that's created there in the mornings and help drop-off speed up. And we have additional spaces for outdoor play space for the school. We'll show in a second where the kindergarten is down here on the ground level. They can have a private play space plus additional play spaces adjacent to the gym, which could also be part of the community play spaces and gardening areas. Finally, with this courtyard space, this could basically have access from the new building as well as access from the old building, and that would help be either a community outdoor learning or for the classrooms themselves, depending on how it gets configured. As we were talking about before with the scheduling, phasing, we would start with the new building, and that's adding 95,000 square feet of program, and then you've got plenty of area for its staging. And then before that Z-shaped building gets removed and demoed, we can do all of the other construction for all of the other schools, maybe even the high school, before it finally gets finished off and that final park is developed. So looking at the programming, after you drop off from Winthrop, the entry comes in here and tries to create a visual connection that's going through the entirety of the building. So from entry all the way through dining, which would stay as open as possible, into the play field. So that way the entry experience becomes very light and very open. As you mentioned, the kindergarten, we located on the ground level in one spot, which can have its own playground adjacent and be near administration and everybody else. Administration set in a place that has a visibility for the entire entrance. So from the admin, you can see the whole entrance, and medical placed off on one side, so could even have a private entrance and exit to pick up the poor sick kids. Finally, we were talking about the other new gym. This could be in an area that has visual connections out to play fields this way, has some connection to a court space that's between the existing building and the new building. And so this way, it has a connection that potentially could be opened up to the public, potentially with a pre-function space that would help in the times that the school's closed and the gym is going to be used. When we were talking about the possibility of keeping this building as the early childhood learning, we're talking about taking the dining space that's currently there and subdividing that with partition walls or something low, something open, and helping to add additional preschool spaces. And moving up, on the second level of the new building, there we have the library media space, which is a very large space to also have windows on both sides that really help bring in light and help visibility, looking out into the playground, looking out into the courtyards. Let's see here. Additional admin space for things like guidance and starting to bring in the music room, the art room, and some of the classrooms. A lot of the shared classrooms we put on the second floor so that they're actually in between both the ground and the third floor, which is where the majority of the classroom spaces are. Okay. And then once we get up to the third level, this is where you see a lot of the classrooms, and you can see that we have things like the Learning Commons. It's right now shown as a very big open space, but this is one of those things that gets subdivided into small group learning spaces, other kinds of shared spaces with the rest of the classes. And at least the way this is shown, the classrooms start getting broken down into spaces that can have small internal courtyards that are kind of shared between classes or shared during classes that could be for private learning or for group spaces.
Could you go back to the second floor?
Yeah.
What happens to where the auditorium is? What happens to it?
Stays the same. It's still there as community use for the auditorium. You're talking about the auditorium in the...
Right.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah. I mean, when we toured the campus last time, they were still using it and still singing in there, so I don't think there's any plans to take that down now.
In this kind of scenario, if that existing building, minus the Z-shaped building, did stay in place as a preschool, pre-K, early childhood learning center with gymnasium and auditorium, we would envision that there wouldn't be a significant expenditure there for renovations. And it's not uncommon for a city or town to use a former school or a former space, et cetera, for preschool, pre-K, because those students essentially go to their classroom, they're only in their classroom, and they're not like K to 12 students that are moving around and using all kinds of different spaces. So we feel like if it was determined that they were going to stay on this campus, that you could do minimal work to that building. I mean, a significant portion of that building is not that old. Minimal work to that building and sort of keep it in place as that community with the gym component and the auditorium component, and then early childhood learning center dividing up some of the other classrooms. And it occurred to me that I think it was you, Tom, that asked the question about could the gym and the dining area, some of those big spaces, be subdivided, and we said no. At the time, we weren't thinking about just for preschool, pre-K. We do think that dining space, if it was preschool, pre-K, could be subdivided because they require larger spaces, and so you don't get into this need to create a space that doesn't have any exterior light. If we just broke it up into 3 large spaces, then it could serve that preschool, pre-K population.
And just to clarify one more time, so if we did decide to make preschool, pre-K part of the high school project, what was your proposal for this space then?
If you did decide to make it part of the high school project, then you have a decision about how much of this building you leave in place, quite frankly. You might decide, if you made all of the preschool, pre-K part of the high school, you might decide to demolish that entire existing building, because as you can see from the site plan, if that building was gone, then you have a major opportunity to develop significant amount of green space, play space, neighborhood space, school space, town space, et cetera, on that site.
If we were to go that route, just so I understand, you were proposing to use the Z-shaped building as swing space. How much of what you have left here as existing would also be used as part of that swing space?
All of it. For example, when the new Lowell is being constructed, Hosmer would operate just like it is now, using all of the building. When the Lowell students, when the Hosmer students move out of this building into this building, it's our assumption that the Lowell students would occupy this building just as the Hosmer students do today. They would circulate through the entire building and utilize the entire facility. When they move out and the Cunniff students move in, again, we would assume they have sort of free reign of the entire building. And then at that point in time, if it became a swing space for the high school, then the high school students would clearly need the entire building. Now, at that point in time, you'd have to make a decision as to whether you wanted to try to take those 5 preschool classrooms and move them to some other facility so that the high school had complete reign of the entire building. It might make some sense to do that. But that would also be the point in time when you're programming and planning the high school to make a decision about whether this building goes completely away because you're going to take all of that component and put it at the high school, or whether this building just stays as a swing space and then becomes preschool, pre-K, and doesn't get combined with the high school. But you would have the opportunity to defer that decision until you're programming and planning the high school, which we think creates a lot of flexibility.
It's directly related to, I was just curious if you guys have a sense of using that for all sorts of swing space and stuff, is there actually enough space to also maintain the preschool? You know, because I was just curious, because I mean, like, it seems like a lot of what's said here is sort of possible preschool and pre-K space. I'm just wondering if there's enough to do that at the same time.
There's enough to do. There's enough to do it until you get to the high school. And then when you get to the high school, the high school population, I mean, just as an example, the high school building, although it's very inefficient, so it's not a good benchmark, is about 160,000 square feet. And so the high school program should be able to fit into a building that's more efficient in about 120,000 square feet, just as an example. And the Hosmer collectively here, all spaces, is just over 100,000 square feet. But as an example, it has no science labs. So if you decided to deploy, for example, 5 or 6 modular science labs onto this site, then you probably could bring the entire high school there. In the meantime, you bought yourself what every city or town trying to do a high school project would love to have, which is a swing space to free up their high school site to do whatever they wish. And if you don't want to utilize it, I'm sure there's an adjacent city or town that would.
Sorry, I'm just going to go back to the building. Just 2 questions, one of which is, I just quickly counting up, I see 24 classrooms. I know in the other buildings, we had a few more in terms of having that space for the science lab or the foreign language room or whatever it might be. But in this one, there aren't as many classrooms as in the other 2 buildings.
The count is 26. I don't know if we missed a labeling or something, but both the Lowell and the Hosmer are at 26.
Yeah, that's right. I had seen 26 in the
correct.
other 2.
Yeah.
So I'm just, maybe if we could just figure out some clarification as to where that mislabeling is. I just want to make sure that we don't end up with
Yeah, what we did for the cost estimating and for the building footprint is to just make sure it was enough overall square footage, that it included all the identified spaces, but there might be an instance where a space is not labeled or it's not specifically delineated because the plans are conceptual, but it does include enough overall square footage to make certain that we met that 26 classroom program.
And then just another question, on the second floor of the new building, proposed, the conceptual design, you've got your library media center and it abuts the gymnasium below. Just curious as to what your thoughts are. I know this is very conceptual, but would there be a wall there? Would there be, some sort of light? I'm just curious.
My thought was there could be some cool connection,
Okay.
visual connection down below. But
Okay.
that was something that would get developed further.
Yeah, I'm just curious, because it's,
It's an opportunity there for sure.
right, okay.
Mary, did you have something? And then Steve.
I did. I'm not familiar with soccer field dimensions, so, but you mentioned that it would be U10 or U11. Is the current field that's on Mount Auburn, is that bigger than U10 or U11?
The current field's bigger. It's actually a bit of an awkward size as far as what the standards are that we saw. What we measured the current field at, which is 200 by 260, that's what we see. From the standards that we saw, there's this U11, U12, which is considered what's 5th and 6th grade. And the dimensions, I'm doing this off the top of my head, was I believe 144 by 180, I think. But the next level up is actually 210 by 300. So when they get to, so the size of the field that's there now is actually somewhere between those two, and not really neither here nor there. But again, we're trying to look at how we can get that maximize the size of the one.
The size that's currently there that Jeff mentioned doesn't fit, for example, Regulation High School. It looks like they just tried to get the largest space possible.
Okay.
And we could certainly get a field there that's larger than the one we're showing, but because we're taking a little bit of a space and we're giving back a lot more space where we're demolishing the Z-shaped building, you would never have as large a contiguous area as you currently have, although we would propose that you would have a much larger overall area.
That makes sense.
But
The three-quarter height walls for the three preschool classrooms, that looks like they're going into the dining room. Have you seen that in a preschool environment?
we have in that you see a lot of very creative use of existing space sometimes for preschool, pre-K. Not if it's designed as a brand-new building, but so many cities and towns across the Commonwealth do their preschool, pre-K in some kind of retrofitted former school building. So we've seen a variety of different things utilized. For example, we're even suggesting that if you do end up utilizing that as the preschool, pre-K building, and you want to minimize your expenditure on it, that huge area right outside the auditorium that has no specific purpose could be a preschool, pre-K classroom area. And it would be kind of cool as an area, because it's not like it's got four walls and they're specifically bounded by it. And that building has some other really nice zones in it that are segregated from the rest of the building, but aren't, rectangles with four walls around them that we think would make pretty interesting preschool, pre-K space.
And then just to comment, if the preschool does go to the high school, maybe, would it be possible that central administration could move to the Osborne in some way,
Oh, that's a
shape,
good
or
point,
fashion?
yeah.
We could also use fields and place for public building department, too.
All right, hold on, hold on. Steve is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I appreciate very much the creative thinking, and particularly about using Hosmer existing space as swing space. It seems like a pretty creative solution for all three elementaries. But I think that question about the preschool, pre-K is an important one, because, you know, if you go back to the site plan real quickly, you know, if that, what's shown on the site plan is existing to remain, didn't remain, and that became open space, I wouldn't want to put the Hosmer where the white block is shown. I don't think that's the, you know, strikes me as a good design for the entire site, if that's what the ultimate is. And I understand, though, the effort to use that as swing space, so you have to keep that while you build the new school. And so, at least in my mind, it makes sense if that's going to remain. If that's not going to remain, maybe not so much. And I don't know, I'd like to think about that.
If it's not going to remain, one of the things it does is it does free up enough area to do any size fields you want, is the one luxury it sort of provides. Granted, it gives you two zones, one zone on each side of the building, but it does free up enough area to create almost any size field you want. But our thought is, I mean, I should say our gut instinct is that if, in fact, you decoupled this preschool, pre-K component from the 3 elementary schools in an effort to keep it more flexible and have the option of at least considering its program with the high school. Even if you do take it to the high school completely, our feeling is that because of the good condition of the 2002 portion of this building and the fact that it's an auditorium and a gym as a resource, that there's likely going to be a lot of support of sort of keeping that building in place. Yeah.
Fair enough.
John? You had something?
Just a couple quick questions. So, with this configuration, there really is no, the existing to remain, the Hosmer there and then the new building, there's no particular interaction between them. I mean, they really are independent. I suppose the Hosmer might go over to use the auditorium, but that would probably be the only reason they would go over to that building.
I would agree with that suggestion, yeah.
So we've moved away. I mean, at one point, we did talk about kind of a separate standing pre-K, but then we decided, you know, kind of, well, there's efficiencies in having it in the same building, but now it's going back to the separation. So, I mean, maybe you could speak a little bit to that. The other thing that unlike the other two buildings, other two elementaries, this is, there's just a major visual change, I think, in the community from Mount Auburn Street. That will be a very different look than what we have now, which is not really true with the other two buildings, but that's a major change.
I think in a good way, though, we think, because from the Mount Auburn Street side, you have the opportunity to develop, you know, a brand-new school building that'll be sitting there and complementing the more historic building slightly behind it and blocking the visual of that, you know, 2002/1967 building behind it.
You can call it unpleasant looking.
Well, you wouldn't even see it probably at all.
Right. You wouldn't see it at all.
Yeah.
And we think that the opportunity to make a new building on Winthrop Street as sort of a standalone facade that looks like a new elementary school is really a major improvement to all the addition renovation options we had here. And a lot of this solution, although we think it's a good functional solution, a good educational solution, a lot of it's cost-driven, because what we're essentially doing is taking the 30,000 square feet of brand-new space that we were trying to put in the K-5 elementary for preschool pre-K, and instead of spending, you know, $500 a square foot on brand-new space, we're saying, you know what, we're going to be creative about the way we utilize this existing building, and even if it becomes a preschool pre-K, we're not going to spend nearly that kind of money on it, because it would suffice kind of as is with some minor modifications. And there are millions of dollars in savings in what we've done here in terms of pulling that early childhood learning center, tens of millions of dollars of savings, at least 10, by pulling that piece out of and proposing it this way.
Sean?
So I want to get back to this idea of using Hosmer as a swing space. I really like the idea of not having to use the modular units, but I think as a committee, we need to discuss other impacts that it has on the learning environment, specifically transportation to the school. So if you're a student in, or if you're a family has a student in the Coniff or the Lowell for 6 months to a whole year, you're going to be needing to transport your family to across town, which is non-trivial at 8 o'clock in the morning. The second thing is drop-off at Hosmer is a pain already, and I can't imagine having 100 or 1,500 high school students also being dropped off at the same time.
650.
Less than 7.
Oh, it's less than 7, so I don't know the numbers.
Yes.
Okay, so anyway, but the idea of having twice as many students being dropped off at the same time. And then the third thing is the play spaces and the outdoor spaces. The new building, which is great, I like, removes a very large play space. And until the renovation is removed, we lose a basketball court and a tennis court and some other things. So I think those things that we need just to consider as we move forward.
Kelly?
So having gone through the glory of pre-K enrollment recently, I think that we just also need to consider the idea of pushing back the pre-K center almost 5 years. I think if we were to do this with the high school project, we would be doing the pre-K center then in 2023. And I know that we're already really short on classrooms right now, and so my concern would be to push that back an additional 4 to 5 years would be really tough on the community. So I would just ask that we consider that. And then I'm gonna ask this question, which I was gonna ask at the end, is on your renovation scopes, are you considering abatement in these level 2, level 3s when you're working with your cost estimator?
In areas where it will be impacted and there will be destructive demolition, yes.
Okay, but we're not looking at fully de-letting, doing full asbestos
No.
removal?
No. A lot of that work has been done, but particularly with the lull, we'll want to be cautious what we disturb because we're trying to avoid just a comprehensive gut and abatement, particularly where we've got completely encapsulated, completely safe conditions that we don't want to disturb.
And those dollars add up.
Right, quickly, yeah.
I think what we've had an opportunity this evening is to see some thoughts and ideas, and I think we have a meeting next week to talk about costs, and we have to start thinking. These have significant ramifications for all 3 neighborhoods. They have significant ramifications on fields. They have, there's a lot of issues, transportation. So a lot of these things, we have to think about now. We have to take a step back. I'm appreciative that Scott put something on paper to give us something to discuss. So now I think we as a committee are gonna, one by one, talk about this. We're gonna have to have a community meeting to show the community what we're talking about and really, get some more feedback. As a committee, we're gonna need to do that because that's gonna help us make the decision, and we have to make sure that we have enough classrooms and we have enough for the needs of the children, and somehow, come up with a budget and come up with something. So there's a lot of ideas. I think we're gonna be working through them, but it's gonna take some time to do that. Lindsay?
Just sort of one quick comment in terms of it. I think as a committee, we also have a responsibility to make sure we're thinking about how short-term some of these challenges are going to be, because some of them are really short-term when we're talking about building 3 almost brand-new elementary schools that are going to last this town a minimum of 30 to 40 years. And so if we're kind of thinking about some of the struggles, I think as a committee, we also have to think about how we remind the public and let them know how short-term some of these inconveniences or challenges might be, and that's going to be an important part of the work that we do as well.
I think one of the things that'll also help, and we just had so much information that we decided to do the cost at the next meeting, but I think getting the cost and understanding how much savings is associated with some of these adjustments will also help bring into perspective kind of whether it's a good value.
I don't think it's just the costs, though. There is significant cost savings, but we have to consider all of what you talked about in the beginning, the sustainability, what Lindsay's talking about. Are we shortchanging ourselves by not changing the windows at the Coniff? Those are things that we would also have to consider as we move forward. So I want to try to wrap this up, Vinnie.
Just one thing. First of all, so this is now we're into 3 months of meetings. I think this is finally, I feel like everything we've talked about, you've pulled together a lot of ideas and created a comprehensive look, particularly with the scheduling and the concept of using the old Hosmer School as a swing space, you know, which is, I think, a major step forward, that we've crossed a major threshold. I think conceptually, I like the way between the 3 schools, how all the pieces fit together. And the idea about the preschool, pre-K building going in that sort of in the existing space, I think that gives us a lot of flexibility. And as we start to move into the high school, I mean, there's a lot we don't know about the high school. You know, what are we going to do with the Phillips School? Are we going to use the former police station as a part of the building? It just buys us a little more time to develop options for the high school. And who knows, you know, we may end up leaving it as you propose. We may end up doing something different with at the high school site. But I think in terms of moving forward, the broad outlines here are really good, and I'm feeling very comfortable with it. And I think you know, I think we should really sort of continue to use this as more sort of the baseline of everything we've talked about the last 3 months to move forward.
Okay. Anything else? The next item we have is a high school update.
So basically yes, thank you very much. At this point in time, the high school update is that our next deliverable is the school building committee list. So tonight, the members of this committee have provided me with the information necessary to submit that form to the MSBA. We'll have some more deliverables in July, and I will update the committee when we get to the point of the next round of deliverables. So that's where we're at with the high school building project.
Thank you. The next school building committee meeting is next Wednesday evening, right here, again, at 6 o'clock. Anything else from anyone? Scott?
I think we're all set, thank you.
Can I get a motion to adjourn? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.